Imagine a world where one man could go from being a national hero to the most notorious suspect in a double murder case. That's exactly what happened with O.J. Simpson. But what most people don't know is how the FBI got involved in the investigation and how we faced some of the toughest challenges in law enforcement history. The moment O.J. Simpson was linked to the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, everything changed. What started as a domestic dispute quickly escalated into one of the most high-profile cases the world has ever seen. And as an FBI agent working on this case, I can tell you that it was unlike anything I'd ever encountered before. At first, we weren't entirely sure what we were dealing with. Was it an act of passion? A calculated move? Was there a deeper conspiracy at play? As the investigation began to unfold, it became clear that this case was more than just about one man's actions. It was about the unraveling of a celebrity's life, a police force under scrutiny, and the public's growing fascination with the idea that one of America's most beloved athletes could be a cold-blooded killer. But the FBI's involvement wasn't as simple as finding a few fingerprints and moving on. No, this was a different kind of case. The evidence we gathered, the witnesses we interviewed, and the media storm that followed, all of it combined to create one of the most complex and challenging investigations of my career. And let me tell you this, it wasn't just about solving the case, it was about dealing with the pressure, the public, and the media. Every step we took felt like we were being watched from every angle. It was like being under a magnifying glass, and if we made a single mistake, the consequences would be catastrophic. But I know that the people watching this video want the truth. You want to know exactly how we caught O.J. Simpson and how the FBI played a pivotal role in the investigation. This wasn't just about solving a murder, it was about justice, about right and wrong, and about how the system can sometimes work when everything is stacked against you. If you're curious about the details of this investigation, the behind-the-scenes action, and the personal toll it took on everyone involved, make sure to subscribe. You're about to hear things you've never heard before, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. If you want to understand the real story of the O.J. Simpson case, the one that hasn't been told by the media, you're in the right place. Stick with us, because in this video, we'll dive into the complexities of this case, the key pieces of evidence, and the moments that shocked the world. Trust me, you'll want to watch until the very end, because the story of how the FBI helped unravel this twisted case will leave you speechless. When you walk into a case like this, you immediately understand how high the stakes are. O.J. Simpson was no ordinary suspect. He was a national hero. And when the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman occurred, the evidence began to mount. But the real challenge was trying to separate the emotions from the facts. The murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were brutal. The crime scene was chaotic, and the clues, at first, didn't seem to lead anywhere definitive. As the FBI was called in to assist local law enforcement and the LAPD, our first goal was to establish a clear understanding of what had happened. We didn't know it then, but this investigation would be unlike anything we had ever worked on. From the beginning, the signs pointed to O.J. Simpson, but there were numerous hurdles in our way. He had no obvious motive at first glance, and he was an incredibly charismatic and well-liked public figure. But that's what made this case so difficult, separating the personal from the professional. We couldn't afford to let his fame cloud our judgment. As agents, we had to focus solely on the evidence and facts in front of us, even if the world was watching. The first key piece of evidence we discovered was the blood. Blood found at the scene of the crime that matched Simpson's DNA. This was a pivotal moment. The question now became, was it circumstantial, or did this prove O.J.'s involvement? It was clear that the forensic team would play a huge role in unraveling the truth. As agents, we had to make sure that every step was meticulously documented, as any mistake could cost the entire case. One of the most significant aspects of this investigation was the timeline. When the murders occurred, O.J. Simpson had an alibi, but the details were shaky. The team had to investigate whether O.J. could have committed the crime during the narrow window of time when the murders happened. This required hours of interviews, going through phone records, and establishing exactly where Simpson was at any given moment. But there was more. O.J. Simpson had a history of domestic violence with Nicole Brown Simpson, which added a layer of complexity to the case. His volatile relationship with his ex-wife was well documented, and it raised questions about the nature of the murders. Was this a crime of passion, or was it something more methodical? One of the things that struck me as I reviewed the evidence was the sheer brutality of the crime. This wasn't a case of a simple argument that spiraled out of control. The murders were violent, and they were planned. The knife wounds to both victims were deep, and the scene was gruesome. O.J. Simpson, it seemed, had a very personal connection to the victims, and the evidence that kept emerging pointed directly at him. It was a strange feeling knowing that the prime suspect in such a high-profile case was someone who had been celebrated as an American hero. This wasn't just a case of finding a killer, it was about unraveling a world that many people didn't want to believe existed. I knew then that the road ahead would be long and complicated. Despite the mounting evidence, we had to remain impartial. The media frenzy was already beginning, and public opinion was swinging wildly. In the days that followed, the pressure to crack the case grew. Every move we made was scrutinized. There was no room for error. As we worked tirelessly to connect the dots, we knew we were up against more than just a difficult suspect. We were up against a system that, for better or worse, was also now intertwined with fame, power, and the public's perception of O.J. Simpson. By the time we had gathered more evidence, including the infamous glove found at O.J.'s property, it was clear that the investigation would take some unexpected turns. But we had a job to do, and we weren't backing down. We were determined to bring justice, no matter who the suspect was or how complicated the case became. As we started piecing together the evidence, one moment stood out that would forever change the direction of the investigation. The infamous glove, the one that would become a symbol of the trial, was discovered. But it wasn't just about finding a piece of clothing. It was about what that glove represented, and the impact it would have on both the investigation and the media. At this point in the investigation, we had already gathered some critical evidence. The blood at the crime scene, the DNA match to O.J. Simpson, and the reports of his violent history with Nicole, all of this pointed toward him. But we needed something more tangible. Something that would make a definitive case. And then came the glove. The glove was found at O.J. Simpson's estate. It wasn't a coincidence. The evidence tied it directly to the crime scene, and as we examined it further, it appeared to have bloodstains. The question we faced, however, was whether this glove belonged to O.J. Simpson, or if it had simply been planted. The stakes couldn't have been higher. I remember the feeling of uncertainty. As we began to analyze the glove, it had blood on it, but it wasn't clear whether the blood was from the victims or from Simpson himself. The glove was a crucial piece of the puzzle. If this glove could be definitively connected to the crime, we would have the smoking gun we so desperately needed. But we also knew that if it was flawed, it could be the one thing that could unravel the entire case. Then the world watched as O.J. Simpson tried on the glove during the trial. As his defense attorney Johnny Cochran said the famous line, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." At that moment, it seemed like the entire case hinged on the fit of that glove. To the public, it looked like Simpson was innocent. The media frenzy exploded, and every camera was focused on the glove. But as agents, we knew that there was much more to the case than that one dramatic moment. We had to focus on the complete picture. There were more pieces of evidence that pointed to Simpson's involvement, including hair fibers found in the victim's hands and shoe prints near the crime scene that matched Simpson's. These were small details, but they were crucial. The blood on the glove was another issue. It wasn't just any blood. It was mixed with the victim's blood. We could analyze the blood stains on the glove and trace their origin to Nicole and Ron. But the challenge was not just the blood, it was the timeline. Could Simpson have had enough time to commit the murders, get rid of the evidence, and then return home, where the glove would eventually be found? We had to work methodically, rechecking all the evidence and facts. Each piece of evidence brought us closer, but it was like trying to fit together a jigsaw puzzle with pieces scattered across different locations. The more we uncovered, the clearer the picture became, and yet the uncertainty still remained. The glove was the symbol of that uncertainty. We had other items of evidence too. The matching shoe prints were another crucial breakthrough. The prints were identified as rare, and they matched Simpson's size. It was a sign that Simpson had been at the scene, but it wasn't enough to charge him without further confirmation. As the investigation continued, we dug deeper into Simpson's history, his movements around the time of the murders, and the potential motive. It was clear that Simpson had the means and opportunity, but did he have the motive? The ongoing pattern of abuse toward Nicole, combined with the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, kept leading us back to the same person. But the gloves, the blood, the prints, they were all only part of the story. What we needed to understand was the full picture of who O.J. Simpson really was. Not just a former football star, but a man with secrets, a man with a dark side that would eventually be exposed to the world. The investigation was far from over, but we were getting closer with each new lead. In a case like this, there are no shortcuts, no easy answers. Every small detail counts, and every new piece of evidence could either make or break the case. For the agents working on the case, there was no room for doubt. We had to do our job, no matter how high the stakes. As the case against O.J. Simpson developed, the media became more than just an observer. They became a driving force. The constant spotlight on the investigation added a layer of pressure that no agent or investigator should ever have to face. The more the world watched, the more complicated our job became. From the moment O.J. Simpson's name was linked to the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, the media frenzy began. The press had a field day, feeding on every new detail, every piece of evidence, every word from the LAPD or the FBI. Headlines screamed for justice, speculation ran rampant, and soon, the case became a circus. It wasn't just about solving the murders anymore, it was about managing public perception. As FBI agents, we had a job to do, and that job was to find the truth. But the pressure we faced from the outside world was unlike anything we had ever encountered before. Every step we took was scrutinized, every move analyzed. What was meant to be a straightforward investigation turned into a media spectacle that shaped public opinion before the facts could even be presented. The public's fascination with Simpson as a former football hero, actor, and beloved celebrity added another layer of complexity. People couldn't fathom that someone so famous could be capable of such heinous acts. The media played a huge part in keeping the public divided, with some believing Simpson's innocence and others calling for his conviction. It was impossible to ignore the way the media portrayed him, either as the tragic hero or the cold-blooded murderer. Every new piece of evidence seemed to be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gave the media more to talk about. On the other, it added more fuel to the fire. If the evidence was damning, the public's opinion would swing in one direction. If there was doubt, it would swing in the opposite direction. It was exhausting trying to keep track of public sentiment while doing the job that we had sworn to do, uncover the truth. The media didn't just sit back and report the facts, they created narratives. They speculated about Simpson's motives, his mental state, his alibi. They dissected every detail, sometimes getting it right, but often getting it wrong. The case became more about media soundbites than it was about hard evidence. As the trial approached, the pressure only increased. Every part of the case, from the glove to the blood evidence, was debated on live TV. Experts were brought in to discuss the case on national talk shows, and every opinion seemed to carry weight. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore, it was a battle for public opinion. And as agents working behind the scenes, it was our responsibility to continue to work with a clear mind, focused on the facts. But that wasn't always easy. The media's constant coverage added tension to every step of the investigation. The spotlight on the case forced us to work even harder to ensure that every piece of evidence was rock solid. There was no room for error, no room for mistakes. What made it even more difficult was how every twist in the case, every new revelation, felt like a performance for the cameras. When the infamous Bronco chase took place, it was as if the investigation was turned into a live-action movie. We were all forced to watch, helpless as the drama unfolded in front of us, knowing that this moment would be talked about for years to come. But it wasn't just entertainment, this was real life. Real victims, real families, and real consequences were at stake. Yet, to the public, it had become an entertainment spectacle. The constant media attention also affected how we worked. Journalists camped outside the LAPD, the courthouse, and even at the homes of potential witnesses. No one was safe from the media's prying eyes. And as much as we tried to keep things confidential, the pressure of the cameras, the pressure of the headlines, made it difficult to control the narrative. At times it felt like the world was watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. We had to make sure that our work wasn't tainted by the pressure of the media circus. This was no longer just a murder investigation, it had become a battle between the law and the public. The question was, could we get through the noise and deliver justice in a case as high-profile as this? The media played a pivotal role in shaping the O.J. Simpson case, and whether we liked it or not, it was something we had to contend with every single day. The courtroom was a battleground. Not just for justice, but for public opinion. As the trial of O.J. Simpson unfolded, we saw firsthand how every detail of the case would be turned into a spectacle. It was clear that this wasn't just about the victims. It was about the nation watching, waiting for a verdict. By the time the O.J. Simpson trial began, the case had already become a global media phenomenon. The public was divided, with some convinced of Simpson's innocence, while others believed the evidence was irrefutable. As agents, we knew our role had shifted from gathering evidence to preparing for what would inevitably be one of the most watched trials in history. From the moment the prosecution began presenting its case, the courtroom was filled with tension. Every word spoken was scrutinized. Every motion made was examined. The defense, led by Johnny Cochran, made sure to focus on any possible doubt, playing the media circus to their advantage. But we knew that the evidence against Simpson was substantial. The blood at the crime scene, the matching DNA, the glove found at his property, each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece that led to one conclusion. But the courtroom was a place where facts often took a backseat to drama. One of the most pivotal moments in the trial came with the now infamous moment when O.J. Simpson tried on the glove in front of the jury. "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," Cochran famously said. At that point, the defense planted a seed of doubt. The glove, which had been found at Simpson's estate, appeared not to fit. The media exploded, and for many people watching, that was the moment the trial turned in Simpson's favor. But for us, it was just another moment in the long and complex investigation. As the trial continued, we knew that our work didn't end just because the case was now in the courtroom. We had to be prepared for every new twist, every new tactic the defense would throw at us. The media was constantly feeding the public's fascination with every detail. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a soap opera. The world was watching. The prosecution had to stay focused, no matter how much the public was swayed by the drama. Inside the courtroom, the evidence was dissected by both the defense and the prosecution. Every expert who had worked on the case had to testify. It was a battle of forensic specialists, each trying to interpret the evidence in their own way. As the FBI agents who had worked on the case, we had to maintain a calm, collected demeanor. Our job was not just to present facts, it was to ensure that everything we did was airtight. The trial had become a place where any slip-up could lead to disaster, and our entire investigation could be thrown into jeopardy. Throughout the trial, the media continued to create new narratives, often taking the smallest details and turning them into headlines. The public's emotions ran high, and with each passing day, the case became more about spectacle than justice. As agents, we had to remind ourselves that we were there for the victims, not for the cameras. The most frustrating part of the trial was knowing how much the defense team played to the jury's emotions. Cochran and his team made sure to focus on Simpson's celebrity status, turning him into a symbol of racial injustice for some, while using his fame to sway public opinion. It was clear that the case was about more than just the evidence. It had become about race, about the LAPD's credibility, and about Simpson's public image. The courtroom became a battleground where legal strategies met public sentiment, and we were just watching it unfold. Despite the tactics used in the courtroom, we knew that the case wasn't as simple as what the media or the defense was portraying. Simpson was guilty. The evidence spoke for itself. But the trial made it clear that getting a conviction wouldn't be easy. The more the defense chipped away at the credibility of the investigation, the harder it became to believe that justice would prevail. The day the verdict was read, the world was watching, and for us, it felt like we had no control over what was going to happen next. The FBI's role was never to influence the outcome. It was to investigate, to gather evidence, and to ensure that justice was served. But when the world was watching, it was hard to separate the truth from the public perception of the truth. For us, it was a reminder that even in the pursuit of justice, there are many forces at play. When the verdict was read, it wasn't just the end of a trial, it was the beginning of a new chapter in how the FBI, the LAPD, and the public would view the criminal justice system. The outcome of the O.J. Simpson trial shook the nation and changed the way we approached investigations. When O.J. Simpson was acquitted of all charges in 1995, it sent shockwaves through the nation. For some, it was a victory for justice, a triumph against what they saw as a racially biased system. For others, it was a glaring failure, proof that a celebrity with enough resources could escape justice, no matter the evidence against him. But for those of us in law enforcement, it felt like a defeat. As agents working on the case, we had poured every ounce of effort into gathering evidence, conducting interviews, and presenting facts that we believed would lead to a conviction. But the trial was about so much more than just the facts. The media's portrayal of Simpson as both a tragic figure and a symbol of racial inequality shaped public perception in ways we couldn't have anticipated. The acquittal left many of us wondering if the public would ever fully trust the system again. For the FBI, the aftermath of the trial meant rethinking how we approached high-profile cases. The Simpson trial had revealed just how much outside factors, such as media coverage, celebrity status, and racial politics, could influence a trial's outcome. The case showed that the truth wasn't always enough. In a country so divided, even the most solid evidence could be overshadowed by public sentiment. The trial also exposed the vulnerabilities within the criminal justice system. The defense's tactics were brilliant, but also manipulative. By focusing on racial tensions and questioning the integrity of the LAPD, they managed to create a narrative that overshadowed the physical evidence. The result was a verdict that didn't necessarily align with the truth, but with the emotions of the public. And while it was the defense's job to create doubt, it was the media's job to amplify it. The courtroom became more about narrative control than the pursuit of justice. For those of us working the case behind the scenes, the aftermath was disheartening. We had followed the law and worked tirelessly to build a case, only to see it undermined in the court of public opinion. It was a reminder of how difficult it could be to bring someone to justice when there were so many forces at play. The trial had blurred the lines between justice and spectacle, and it left us questioning whether we could ever truly rely on the legal system to uphold truth when the stakes were this high. The public's reaction to the trial also left its mark on law enforcement. The Simpson case divided the nation, and it created a rift between communities of different races, classes, and political beliefs. For some, the verdict was a sign of systemic failure. For others, it was a reminder of the flaws in how the legal system had handled race and privilege. As the FBI, we were tasked with working in a society that was more polarized than ever. We had to be more careful, more methodical in our investigations, but we also had to learn to navigate the growing distrust between law enforcement and the public. As agents, we faced questions that didn't have easy answers. How do you restore public trust when a case this high-profile ends in acquittal? How do you reconcile your belief in the justice system when the outcome feels so unjust? In the years following the trial, many of us wrestled with these questions. We realized that while the law was objective, the world around it was not. Public perception, media narratives, and the influence of powerful figures in society had the ability to shape the way justice was seen. and sometimes even the way it was delivered. The O.J. Simpson trial did more than shape the future of criminal justice. It changed how law enforcement, especially the FBI, would approach cases that would become public spectacles. It forced us to confront the reality that justice wasn't always about the evidence. It was about the system, the players involved, and the larger narrative at play. And in the end, the trial would go down as a defining moment in not just Simpson's life, but in the history of the American criminal justice system. The trial was over. But for those of us who worked on the case, it felt like the real battle was just beginning. The verdict may have been handed down, but the questions, doubts, and frustrations lingered in our minds. Our mission was far from over. Once the trial concluded, it was clear that the FBI's involvement in the O.J. Simpson case didn't end with the acquittal. While the public focused on the trial's dramatic moments and the sensationalist media frenzy, we were still deeply committed to the notion of justice for Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. For us, the trial was just one part of the larger story. We were tasked with continuing the search for answers, even in the face of an acquittal that left many disillusioned. While Simpson had been found not guilty in a court of law, there was still an overwhelming sense of unfinished business within the FBI. Our commitment to finding the truth didn't change, even though the case had officially been closed. The legal system had failed to convict him, but we knew there was still the possibility of justice in the future. One of the most significant things we learned during the investigation was that the pursuit of truth doesn't always follow a straight line. Even after the trial, the public's perception of the case and Simpson's innocence or guilt remained a source of intense debate. As the years went by, the FBI's role continued, albeit in a different way. We weren't actively investigating new leads in the case, but we kept a watchful eye on Simpson. The investigation into his activities never fully stopped. The weight of our previous work, the blood-stained glove, the phone records, the alibi inconsistencies continued to weigh on us. We couldn't forget the details. We couldn't stop the haunting thought that despite everything, we had failed to secure a conviction for two innocent victims. Our involvement was also tied to public sentiment. The way the media spun the trial meant that many people still believed Simpson had been wrongfully accused. In the years following the trial, we were often contacted for interviews, documentaries, and follow-ups, as people still felt the need to know the real story. But for us, it wasn't about narratives or sensationalism. It was about the victims and their families. It was about ensuring their stories weren't lost in the media circus. Even after the trial, there were lingering questions that the FBI remained focused on. Did Simpson have more to do with the murders than we ever realized? Could we ever truly know the full extent of what happened that night? These questions fueled our desire for justice, even when the legal system had declared Simpson innocent. Our role shifted from an active investigation to a more passive one, waiting for the right moment, the right tip, or the right evidence to surface that could eventually lead to Simpson being held accountable. The FBI also had to contend with a broader societal issue, the sense that powerful, well-connected people could escape justice. Simpson's acquittal reaffirmed this belief for many. As agents, we had to wrestle with the fact that a celebrity, someone with enough resources, could manipulate the system to avoid a guilty verdict. It was a harsh reality for us, but it made us more determined to ensure that in other cases, justice wouldn't be so easily denied. In the end, even after the trial concluded, Simpson continued to be a controversial figure, with many feeling that the justice system had failed. The public was still divided. Some still believed in his innocence, while others were convinced of his guilt. But one thing was clear. The work the FBI had done had revealed a great deal of truth about the crime, even if it couldn't be fully recognized in the courtroom. As agents, we knew that sometimes justice doesn't always come in the way we expect. We continued to remember the victims, Nicole and Ron, and their families, who would never have their loved ones back, no matter what happened in the courts. The aftermath of the trial left us with a lasting reminder: the pursuit of justice is rarely clear-cut, and sometimes, despite all the evidence in the world, the outcome is out of our hands. We had done everything we could, and yet there were still questions left unanswered. The case of O.J. Simpson remained unresolved in more ways than one, both in the courtroom and in the minds of the people who followed it. But for us in the FBI, it was a case that never fully ended. The quest for justice continued, both for the victims and for the truth. As time passed, the O.J. Simpson case became more than just a moment in history. It became a turning point for how law enforcement approached high-profile cases, the media, and public perception. The O.J. Simpson case wasn't just a landmark criminal trial, it was a defining moment for law enforcement agencies, particularly the FBI. In many ways, the trial exposed vulnerabilities in how the justice system works, the relationship between law enforcement and the media, and the difficulties faced when handling high-profile investigations. For those of us who worked on the case, the aftershocks were felt long after the trial concluded. One of the most immediate and lasting effects of the O.J. Simpson case was the way law enforcement agencies interacted with the media. The trial had been broadcast to millions of people around the world, and the relentless media coverage of the case had changed the way the FBI and other law enforcement agencies approached their investigations. The line between law enforcement and the media had blurred. In the past, cases like Simpson's would have been handled with far less media scrutiny. But in this case, the public consumed every aspect of the investigation, from the very first 911 call to the final verdict. This created a new dynamic, one in which law enforcement had to be more cautious about what was shared publicly and how it might influence public opinion. The media played a crucial role in shaping the narrative around Simpson's case. It wasn't just about the facts anymore. It was about creating a spectacle, a story that captivated the public's attention. As agents, we often found ourselves on the sidelines, trying to do our jobs while the media painted a different picture of the case every day. For many of us, it felt like we were no longer pursuing justice for the victims, but were part of an entertainment show where the outcome was determined by public opinion rather than evidence. Another major issue that emerged from the case was the role of public perception. When Simpson was acquitted, it left a huge portion of the population disillusioned with the justice system. Many believed that Simpson's celebrity status had influenced the trial, tipping the scales in his favor. The case sparked widespread debates about race, privilege, and inequality in the criminal justice system, and the FBI found itself caught in the middle of these conversations. It was no longer just about a murder investigation, it was about a larger issue of trust between law enforcement and the public. The aftermath of the O.J. Simpson case also had a profound effect on how the FBI approached future high-profile cases. We realized that, no matter how much evidence we gathered, or how well we did our jobs, the outcome of a case could be swayed by factors beyond our control. As a result, we had to rethink our strategies when dealing with public perception and media attention. The focus shifted to maintaining the integrity of the investigation, avoiding any media involvement that could potentially compromise the case, and preparing for the intense scrutiny that followed high-profile crimes. For agents like me, the Simpson case raised several difficult questions. How do you balance the pursuit of justice with the overwhelming presence of media and public opinion? How do you stay focused on the facts when the entire world is watching, judging, and second-guessing every move you make? These questions lingered long after the trial, and they affected how we approached every subsequent investigation. The O.J. Simpson case also changed the way law enforcement viewed the celebrity status of suspects. Simpson's case demonstrated the power of fame and money in influencing the justice process. The fact that someone of Simpson's wealth and status could hire an army of top-tier lawyers to manipulate the system left many of us frustrated and questioning the fairness of the justice system. It was a stark reminder of the gaps in the system that needed to be addressed. In the end, the Simpson trial left an indelible mark on law enforcement. It wasn't just the outcome of the trial that had an impact. It was the way the case forced us to reconsider how we conduct investigations, engage with the media, and manage public perception. The trial highlighted the complexities of working in a society that is often divided along racial, social, and economic lines. It underscored the challenges we face when pursuing justice in the public eye, where the facts often take a back seat to opinions, emotions, and narratives. For many of us who worked on the case, the O.J. Simpson trial was a wake-up call. It taught us that in high-profile cases, the truth isn't always enough. The system may be built on facts and evidence, but the reality is that public opinion and media influence often shape the outcome.
The trial was a reminder that, as law enforcement, we have to be vigilant, not just in our work, but in understanding the broader forces at play. The O.J. Simpson case may have ended in 1995, but its impact continues to resonate in the way we approach justice today.
Even now, over 2 decades later, the O.J. Simpson case continues to haunt both the public's view of law enforcement and the way we approach criminal investigations. It was a case that not only captivated the nation, but also changed the landscape of the criminal justice system. The O.J. Simpson case did more than just make headlines. It reshaped how we view law enforcement's role in high-profile cases, how the media influences the judicial process, and how the public interacts with the justice system. For those of us involved in the investigation, the case left a lasting imprint on our careers and personal perspectives on justice. Despite the acquittal in court, the shadows of that trial lingered long after the gavel came down. One of the most significant long-term effects was the realization that in the court of public opinion, evidence sometimes takes a back seat to emotion, media narratives, and personal beliefs. As an agent, you are trained to follow the facts, the evidence, and the law, but Simpson's case was a reminder that public opinion can often be more powerful than even the most convincing evidence. No matter how clear the evidence was, the influence of the media and the public's perception of Simpson as a beloved celebrity ultimately overshadowed the details of the case. The way the media turned the trial into a spectacle also made us reevaluate our relationship with the press. The relentless coverage and the constant barrage of commentary made it difficult to focus on the investigation itself. Law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, learned the hard way that in high-profile cases, media coverage can significantly alter the trajectory of the investigation, shaping how the public perceives the facts and ultimately influencing the outcome. Even after the trial ended, the public remained divided. While Simpson was acquitted of the murders, many still believed he was guilty. Others, particularly those who felt the trial was a miscarriage of justice, continue to argue that the system had failed. For the FBI, the case underscored the complexities of dealing with cases where the lines between justice and media-driven perception are blurred. We couldn't just focus on the evidence, we also had to be aware of the narrative that was being spun outside the courtroom. Additionally, the racial and societal implications of the case reverberated through law enforcement and the public. Simpson's trial ignited conversations about race, privilege, and systemic inequality, not just in the criminal justice system, but in American society at large. For the FBI, it highlighted the ways in which social, political, and cultural factors can influence the public's perception of justice. The case also showed the tension between public expectations and the realities of the judicial process. For many law enforcement officers, the O.J. Simpson case was a reminder of the personal cost of pursuing justice. The emotional toll it took on the families of the victims, the investigators, and even the jurors was enormous. We were constantly reminded that behind every high-profile case, there are real lives affected by the outcomes. For those of us who worked on the investigation, it was more than just a case, it was a haunting experience that affected our views on justice, fairness, and the law for years to come. Simpson's case also highlighted how complex the criminal justice system can be. As an investigator, you are often tasked with balancing the pursuit of truth with the realities of legal and procedural hurdles. The trial was a reminder that even with overwhelming evidence, a suspect can be acquitted and public opinion can turn a case into something entirely different than what the evidence suggests. The FBI had to reconcile the law with a public that had formed opinions based not on the facts, but on media narratives, public sentiment, and sensationalism. Even in the years following the case, Simpson remained a controversial figure. His celebrity status continued to influence how people perceived him. Whether in media interviews, documentaries, or public appearances, Simpson continued to draw attention and his case remained a topic of national debate. For those who had worked on the case, this was both a source of frustration and a constant reminder of how a high-profile case can take on a life of its own long after the trial is over. Ultimately, the O.J. Simpson case left a legacy that law enforcement continues to grapple with today. It changed how we approach high-profile investigations, how we deal with the media, and how we recognize the role of public perception in shaping outcomes. It reminded us that justice is not just about following the law, it's about understanding the broader implications of each case, especially when emotions, media, and public opinion come into play. The O.J. Simpson case may have concluded in the courtroom, but its ripple effects are still felt in the ways law enforcement and the public view the justice system today.